Have you ever been around someone who seems so emotionally aware and deeply present that you almost feel like they can see straight through you? That is the kind of presence a super empath carries. They experience emotions intensely, and when they love with their whole heart. But being deeply compassionate doesn't mean they're blind or easily fooled. Now imagine a super empath becoming involved with someone emotionally avoidant. Someone who backs away when things become too real, who closes off when emotional closeness starts asking for something deeper. In the beginning, the avoidant may feel like they have the advantage. They stay detached, unpredictable, difficult to read, and the other person keeps trying to understand them. But over time, something begins to change. The empath slowly recognizes the pattern, and through a quiet kind of strength, they start challenging the very defenses the avoidant has depended on to feel emotionally safe and in control. Here are 5 subtle ways a super empath can quietly unravel an avoidant's illusion of control without shouting, fighting, or trying to force anything. When a super empath finally stops chasing, it rarely looks dramatic. There is no big announcement, no angry goodbye, no attempt to make the other person jealous. It simply becomes quiet. Yet that quiet can change everything. Emotionally avoidant people often become comfortable with a familiar cycle. They pull back, and someone comes closer. They create distance, and their partner works harder to reconnect. Over time, this pattern can give them the feeling that they control how close the relationship becomes and when. But a super empath eventually starts seeing the pattern for what it is. In the beginning, they may continue reaching out. They may try to understand the silence, offer reassurance, and believe that enough patience and love can calm the fear hiding behind the other person's withdrawal. But eventually, a deeper truth becomes impossible to ignore. You cannot heal a wound that someone refuses to admit exists. And no relationship can remain healthy when only one person is doing the emotional work. So the empath begins to change, not to manipulate the situation, but because something inside them finally wakes up. They stop feeling responsible for explaining themselves again and again. They stop always being the first one to reach out. They stop constantly checking whether everything is okay. Instead of chasing every moment of silence, they allow the silence to exist. Their absence isn't loud, it is simply consistent. And that can be incredibly unsettling for the avoidant, because the empath may have once been the steady presence in the relationship, the person who understood without being asked, the person who created emotional safety and offered connection without demanding the same level of openness in return. Then suddenly, that energy is no longer freely available. This isn't about abandoning anyone. It is about taking their energy back. The empath is no longer willing to survive on occasional affection and emotional crumbs. They begin remembering that their love has value and that they deserve a connection where effort is not something they have to beg for. And once that happens, the familiar rhythm the avoidant relied upon begins to fall apart. They can no longer keep their distance while assuming the empath will always remain close enough to catch them. That's when the loss becomes real. The ego that once felt secure in its control may begin asking uncomfortable questions. Why haven't they reached out? Why aren't they trying to fix this? Have they moved on? Did I misunderstand how much they were willing to tolerate? Did I actually lose someone important? The space left behind by the empath can become impossible to ignore. And that silence may force the avoidant to confront the very things they have spent so much time escaping: emotional responsibility, vulnerability, and the frightening possibility of genuine intimacy. The empath's detachment isn't a performance, it's growth. Without saying a single word, their actions communicate something powerful. I understand this pattern now, and I no longer need to lose myself inside it. This isn't a game designed to win someone's attention. It is a decision to choose peace. And for a person who has built emotional walls to protect their sense of control, the calm withdrawal of someone who truly cared can be far more confronting than any argument. A super empath also has a powerful way of reflecting emotional distance without turning it into a fight. They don't necessarily accuse or demand explanations. Their strength often comes from simply noticing what is happening and responding to reality rather than trying to force it to change. They don't need to scream, "You're pulling away from me." They don't constantly demand to know why the other person won't open up. Instead, they begin matching the level of emotional investment they are actually receiving. When the avoidant pulls back, the empath stops stretching themselves further to close the distance. When communication becomes inconsistent, the empath no longer exhausts themselves trying to keep every conversation alive, not as revenge, not as punishment, but as an honest reflection of what the relationship has become. And in that moment, the avoidant is faced with something they may not have expected: a mirror. Avoidant patterns can survive when there is an imbalance, when one person maintains the emotional connection while the other controls how much closeness is allowed. But when the empath stops carrying the entire emotional weight, that imbalance can no longer hide. The avoidant may expect reassurance. They may expect pursuit, understanding, and endless emotional effort. But instead, they encounter calm neutrality, and that can shake their sense of control because the relationship is no longer operating according to the old rules. Perhaps the most unsettling part is that the empath isn't demanding anything. They aren't threatening to leave. They aren't making dramatic ultimatums or begging the avoidant to become someone different. They are simply responding to what is in front of them with clarity and self-respect. And sometimes, nothing challenges avoidance more than realizing that the person who once kept reaching for you has finally learned to stand peacefully without you. They simply stop carrying the emotional weight of the relationship alone. And sometimes, that quiet decision speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Without the empath constantly providing warmth, reassurance, and understanding, the avoidant is finally left to experience the emptiness they once avoided. There is nothing there to soften it anymore. This kind of mirroring isn't about copying someone's behavior or playing a game. It's about seeing the truth clearly. The avoidant begins to experience the consequences of their emotional distance as it happens. There are no long explanations and no endless attempts to analyze what went wrong. Distance is met with distance. Silence is no longer chased or repaired. The emotional imbalance they were comfortable with is suddenly reflected back to them, and that can be deeply unsettling. At first, the avoidant may feel confused or even irritated. They may think something has changed, they're becoming cold. But often, what they're truly experiencing is the loss of the emotional safety net that was always beneath them. The empath is no longer protecting them from the consequences of their own fear of closeness. Instead, they're responding honestly to what is being given. For someone who is used to controlling emotional distance, that change can feel uncomfortable. When a super empath reflects the gaps in a relationship, they are no longer managing those gaps for you. They are allowing you to see them, and being seen in that way, without pressure, anger, or persuasion, can be far more powerful than someone desperately begging you to open your heart. The empath stops trying to repair everything on their own. They allow the relationship to reveal itself as it truly is, instead of continuing to hold on to the version they hoped it could become. And within that reflection, the avoidant may finally begin to understand not only what they've been running from, but also what their emotional unavailability could eventually cost them. For the first time, losing the empath may no longer feel like an abstract possibility. It starts to feel real. A super empath also has a remarkable ability to create emotional space for others. They can sit beside someone's silence without immediately trying to fill it. They listen beyond words and often understand what another person is struggling to express. In the early stages of a relationship with an avoidant, the empath often becomes the emotional anchor. They are patient. They try to understand. They keep reaching across the emotional distance in the hope of creating a genuine connection. They don't force vulnerability, and they don't always interpret emotional shutdown as a personal rejection. They understand that pain and old wounds can take time to heal. So they wait, they hope. They continue showing up with an open heart, believing that safety and consistency might eventually help the other person come closer. But even the most compassionate person eventually reaches a limit. What makes a super empath different is that their ability to hold space does not mean they will accept anything forever. Eventually, they recognize when their openness is being met repeatedly with resistance, avoidance, or emotional manipulation. And when that realization becomes clear, something inside them changes. They don't necessarily leave with a dramatic speech. They don't threaten or try to create fear. Instead, they shift quietly, calmly, and with a new sense of clarity. A boundary begins to form, not always through words, but through their actions and energy. Where they once asked, "Is everything okay?" they may now allow the other person to speak when they are ready. Where they once started every difficult conversation, they pause and see whether the avoidant is willing to step forward on their own. And when silence continues, the empath no longer feels responsible for breaking it. They can sit with that silence too, but this time they are doing it for themselves. They begin protecting their emotional energy. They understand that constantly making room for someone who refuses to meet them halfway is not always love or compassion. Sometimes it becomes a way of abandoning yourself. And when someone who has offered patience, grace, and understanding finally reaches the point of saying, "This relationship is no longer working for me," those words carry a different kind of weight. They aren't spoken to punish. They aren't meant to cause pain. They come from a truth that has taken time to develop through reflection, disappointment, and many quiet moments of hurt. A boundary like that doesn't always create an argument. Sometimes it creates an emptiness, because suddenly the avoidant no longer has access to the emotional cushion they may have quietly come to depend on. The empath who was always there to listen, understand, and absorb the emotional tension is no longer available to carry feelings that don't belong to them, that can leave the avoidant feeling genuinely surprised. After all, they may never have been pressured. They were given space, perhaps more space than they ever asked for. But the empath's calmness should never be mistaken for blindness. Just because they didn't confront every withdrawal doesn't mean they failed to notice it. Often, they were simply watching and waiting to see whether the avoidant would eventually choose connection and growth for themselves. And when it becomes clear that they won't, the empath makes a different choice. They choose themselves. That isn't weakness, and it isn't giving up. It is the moment they stop waiting for someone to join them in an emotional space they have been occupying alone. And that calm decision can shake an avoidant more deeply than anger ever could, because it isn't fueled by emotion in the moment. It's rooted in strength. A super empath is naturally sensitive to pain, even when that pain belongs to someone else. They often notice what others miss. They're usually the first to ask if something is wrong, the first to look beneath someone's cold behavior, and the first to recognize that withdrawal may be driven by fear rather than a lack of feeling. For a while, this can make them incredibly patient with an avoidant partner. They absorb changes in mood. They search for reasons behind distant behavior. They may even take responsibility for problems that were never theirs to carry. When tension appears in the relationship, the empath is often the one asking, "What did I do wrong?" Even when the other person's behavior has very little to do with them, their willingness to take on emotional responsibility can unintentionally make things easier for the avoidant. It creates an escape from difficult feelings, an escape that may happen without either person fully recognizing how damaging the pattern has become. Avoidant people often struggle with emotional discomfort. When tension begins to build, their instinct may be to move away from it rather than sit with it. So instead of facing what hurts, they may redirect the conversation, shut down, pull back, or place the focus somewhere else. They may minimize what you're feeling. They may suggest that you're too emotional, too sensitive, too needy, or simply asking for too much. In the beginning, the empath may believe them. They may start questioning themselves, making their needs smaller and trying even harder to become easier to love. But eventually, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. No matter how patient they are, how gently they communicate, or how carefully they try to avoid conflict, the responsibility somehow keeps falling back onto them. The empath keeps adjusting, becoming calmer, more understanding, and more forgiving, yet the blame still finds its way into their hands. Then one day, something changes. The super empath finally sees the cycle clearly. The avoidant pulls away. The empath feels hurt or confused, and instead of receiving comfort, understanding, or reassurance, they're met with silence, deflection, or another reason why their feelings are somehow the problem. And with that realization comes a quiet but powerful shift. The empath stops carrying blame that was never theirs to begin with. There doesn't have to be a confrontation. There doesn't have to be an argument. You can see the change in the way they carry themselves, in what they no longer feel the need to explain, and in how they respond when the other person shuts down. When they're told, "You're overreacting," they no longer fight desperately to prove that their feelings are valid. Somewhere inside, they simply step back. When a serious conversation is avoided through sarcasm, distance, or emotional shutdown, the empath no longer chases the other person down to force a resolution. They recognize something they should have understood long ago. This isn't mine to fix alone, and that shift can deeply unsettle the avoidant, because the entire emotional dynamic has changed. Where blame could once be redirected and absorbed, there is now very little reaction. The empath is no longer offering their energy to soften every uncomfortable moment. They've stopped explaining away behavior that hurts them. They've stopped giving endless chances to patterns that never change. They've stopped translating disrespect into something they are supposed to patiently tolerate. For the avoidant, this can feel disorienting. The person who once softened every difficult edge is no longer cushioning the impact. The person who once went out of their way to understand every fear and every withdrawal is no longer willing to use understanding as an excuse for being mistreated. And by releasing blame that never belonged to them, the empath leaves the avoidant face to face with something they may have spent years avoiding: their own responsibility. There comes a point in every super empath's journey when they finally choose themselves. And when that moment arrives, it usually isn't loud. It doesn't always come with anger, slammed doors, or one final emotional speech. More often, it is a quiet and deeply grounded decision. A decision made after countless conversations within themselves, after giving opportunity after opportunity, after holding on to hope and believing that if they just loved deeply enough, patiently enough, consistently enough, the other person might eventually meet them in the same emotional space. But love alone cannot create reciprocity. Eventually, The empath, who has been carrying the emotional weight of two people, realizes they are exhausted. And for the first time, they put that weight down. Avoidant people can become accustomed to being loved by those who continue choosing them even when they remain emotionally unavailable. Sometimes that loyalty becomes something they unconsciously expect. They assume the empath will keep waiting, keep understanding, and keep making room for them. But what they often fail to see is that the same emotional depth that makes an empath capable of loving so openly can also give them the wisdom to recognize when it is time to leave. They don't walk away to punish anyone. They walk away because continuing to stay would require them to abandon themselves. When a super empath finally chooses their own well-being, it is rarely because of one isolated moment. It is the result of many moments quietly collecting over time, moments when they felt unheard, moments when they felt invisible, moments when their feelings were dismissed, minimized, or pushed aside. Each time the avoidant closed down or created distance, the empath may have remained, hoping that love and patience would eventually create enough safety for openness to grow. But eventually, they understand something painful. They are no longer building a relationship together. They are stuck waiting for one. And strangely, that realization can become incredibly freeing. The avoidant may be shocked when the empath finally steps away. They may wonder, "Why now? I never told you to leave." But the answer often exists in everything the empath has already stopped saying. There may be no dramatic accusation, no attempt to make them feel guilty, no long explanation, because the truth has become simple. A person who constantly chooses everyone else while neglecting themselves will eventually wake up feeling emotionally empty. And when they finally recognize what that pattern has cost them, the healthiest thing they can do is stop trying to earn love from someone who is unwilling or unable to offer it freely. This is often when the avoidant feels the loss most intensely, not because the empath finally screamed or demanded that they change, but because they left with dignity. Their absence can say more than an argument ever could. For the first time, the avoidant may truly understand that the person who always stayed, always reached out, and always tried to understand is no longer there. Not because the empath suddenly stopped caring, but because they finally began caring for themselves too. And that change, the decision to value self-respect over endless emotional pursuit, can be one of the most confronting experiences an avoidant person ever faces. So here's the deeper truth. When a super empath enters the life of an emotionally avoidant person, the connection can become more than just a relationship. It can become a mirror, a quiet confrontation with everything the avoidant has built to protect themselves from being vulnerable, not through force, not through demands, but through presence, patience, emotional honesty, and eventually boundaries that communicate more clearly than words ever could. A super empath doesn't set out to destroy anyone's ego. That isn't the purpose of their love. But their self-awareness, emotional clarity, and eventual refusal to keep abandoning themselves can expose the illusion of control that avoidance depends upon. And there is a certain irony in all of this. The very things the avoidant may have resisted, the empath's depth, honesty, openness, and vulnerability, can become the very things they miss most once that person is gone. The silence that follows, the empty space where warmth once existed, the absence of the person they assumed would always remain. Sometimes, that absence becomes the lesson they never expected to learn from someone they never thought would leave. And to every empath listening, never mistake your softness for weakness. Your ability to feel deeply is not something that needs to be fixed or hidden. It is one of your greatest strengths. But that strength becomes even more powerful when you learn to offer yourself the same loyalty, care, and devotion that you so freely give to everyone else. Choose yourself with the same intensity you have spent years choosing others. And to the avoidant who is wondering why the loss feels so much heavier than expected, perhaps it isn't only about missing someone. Perhaps it's also about realizing that someone was willing to love you openly and fully, right up until they understood that you were never prepared to meet them with the same willingness. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being willing to look inward. Whether you recognized yourself in the empath, the avoidant, or somewhere between the two, real change begins with awareness. And if you're here reflecting on these patterns, you've already taken an important first step. Until next time, respect your boundaries, protect your peace, and remember that genuine connection begins when we stop running from the parts of ourselves that are asking to be seen. Thank you for listening, and take care.